If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What are the scariest and most frightening encounters involving glitches, lost time, dimensions, portals, and similar phenomena? I live with my boyfriend and his parents. There is a large bay window where the wall rounds out in the kitchen. The sliding glass door is close to it, so you can see through the sliding glass door, a small stretch of wall, and then the bay window. My boyfriend's mom and I got done talking in the kitchen for a while, and she went upstairs to take a nap. I looked out the sliding glass door from an angle and saw his mom in the same exact outfit I just saw her wearing and everything. Walking from the side of the house out into the yard, the small wall was blocking my view, so I went up to the bay window to see where she went. No one was there. My boyfriend was coming down the stairs, so I had him check, and literally no one was there. No explanation, nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I was creeped out, and now I can't sleep. I have lived in my current house for nearly 2 years now. I'm fairly familiar with the streets, and driving home from work is pure muscle memory. Despite living in a fairly remote area surrounded by forests of trees, the roads are well lit on my street. As you pass the trees on the left-hand side of my street, eventually they open up to the hill that my house sits on and my driveway, with more houses and trees further down the dead-end road. One night, I got off work at the typical time and headed home. Yet as I drove down my street, I accidentally drove past my house. In the past 2 years, I've never done this. So at the end of the street, at the dead end, I turned around and headed back. Yet as I drove back, my house wasn't there. Just a never-ending curtain of trees along the road. I got to the bottom of the street and turned around again. I passed by where my house should be, but nothing was there but trees. I felt like I was going insane. I kept driving towards the dead end and turned around again. As I shifted the gears in my car, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see that there was a man in the back seat of my car. He was tall and slender, and he bent over at the waist. He noticed I was looking at him, and he looked up, and I realized he didn't have a face. He then stood up. I stared at him, puzzled, because as he stood, his entire upper body went through the roof of my car as though it weren't there. He then turned and walked away, passing through the trunk of my car. I watched him slowly walk towards the edge of the forest and enter it. Spooked, I quickly drove down the street, and suddenly my house appeared where it was supposed to be. I was running late for work this morning while my wife was tending to our 1-year-old, who was sick with a cold. She asked if I could stop at the Walgreens down the street to get him some cough medicine. I was in a huge rush but didn't want him to go without it, so I headed over there as quickly as I could. My wife and I were on the phone as I was driving and pulling into the parking lot. The street was busy and packed with cars, and as I was walking up to the store, I noticed a woman putting her screaming child into her car just outside the store. My wife was reminding me which medicine to buy as I checked my phone for the time, and that's when it got weird. The second I walked into the store, my phone turned off, and the call dropped. The sliding door closed behind me, and the entire store was empty. The lighting was different than what I was used to. Fluorescent and cold. There was no one at the front, and no one in any of the aisles I could see. I turned around to look outside, and there were no cars in the street, not even the woman who was just there 5 seconds ago. I actually said hello? Twice loudly, feeling like this was some sort of horror movie I was in. The entire store was silent, and I went to grab my phone again to film this in case no one believed me, and of course it wouldn't turn on. I turned the corner down a random aisle, and just like that, there are people there. The lighting is different now and warmer. There was even music now. I turned to look at the front, and there is a customer mid-transaction with a checker. My phone starts working again, and my wife is calling me. She tells me it just went silent and said the call failed. I stood there for a minute and realized there was nothing I could do but buy the medicine and go on with my day. I don't know if this was a glitch in the Matrix, odd and coincidental timing, or some weird parallel universe type stuff, but all I know is that it was strange as hell, and I didn't really know who to tell this to. This story took place several years ago, but I have never been able to forget it. It keeps popping up at random, quiet times, and it makes me wonder what the hell really happened. My husband and I were considering moving further from the city than we are now. We live about 45 minutes west of St. Louis, Missouri. We drove outside of Union, Missouri, to a town called Rosebud to look at a home on some acres. After looking at the house, we decided to drive around the area to see what the neighborhood was like. This is a very rural area, and the roads off Highway 50 were gravel. We took one road after another and were pleasantly lost in the beautiful countryside. We got on one little gravel road that was in bad shape, so we had to go really slow to keep from sliding. We came upon a little abandoned church that was sitting right next to the road. We crept by it really slowly, looking at it. The windows were gone, and there was no paint left. The bell tower was still there, but there was no bell. We could look right through the front windows to the windows on the other side. There were old pews still there, which surprised me. I would have thought they'd been stolen long ago. Neither of us said a word and just drove on in silence. I was thinking what a crime it was to let such a neat old structure fall into ruin, and I assumed Charlie was thinking the same. Then he turned to me and said, "What do you think they were doing in there?" I didn't understand, and he explained, "All those people." Well, the gist of the story is that I saw no one, and Charlie saw a church full of people just sitting in the pews, looking ahead or with their heads down. After a couple minutes of bantering with each other, I insisted we turn around and have a second look. We headed back, and this is where it gets even weirder. No church. At first, we thought we had not gone far enough. Then we thought we had gone too far. No church. We found it right where it should have been, and there was just rocky grass that had been there a long time. We talk about it now and then, but we still can't figure out a reasonable solution. I've struggled with this situation, going over it in my head for months now and trying to make sense of it all. I finally decided to share it here just to get it off my chest and to tell someone. To set the scene, my driveway is a long upward slope, wooded all around with no other houses visible from the foot of my driveway, and the road is on a blind turn from both directions. Cars love to travel at high speeds around this bend. It's a popular road to drive on sunny days because it's winding and oceanside. It was a stormy winter morning back in January or February of this year. I can't remember exactly, but I glanced out the window, and there was a car stopped in the middle of the road looking blankly up my driveway. I thought this was incredibly strange, as he was likely to cause an accident at any moment. I got up from the couch to take a closer look, and by the time I reached the window, the car had left. I looked a little closer down the driveway, and I noticed a single set of paw prints coming up the driveway leading into the woods. I thought that maybe this was a stray dog, so I threw on my boots and went outside to follow the tracks. As I got a little closer, I noticed they went up and over the hill through the woods to a neighboring street. I followed the tracks up through the woods when suddenly the paw print stopped and human tracks began. All going in the same direction and all along the same line of travel. I couldn't really believe what I was seeing. I looked over and over to see if I could tell if the tracks were doubled over, but there was no evidence of it at all. I am no tracker by any means, but there was a clearly defined boot print in the strides following the last paw prints, and they continued until they hit the pavement. I go over it in my head fairly often, just thinking about what I saw and how it doesn't make any sense to me. I had just turned 22, and my parents had sold their house and purchased a place out in the country. On the property, there was a big shed not far from the house that I decided to turn into my place. Now, I felt kind of uncomfortable in the shed sometimes, but my dog kept me company, so it wasn't so bad. Anyway, I had been in there for maybe 2 weeks, and one night I'm on the computer, my dog is asleep at my feet, and I need to pee, so I get up and go outside to piss. It's a beautiful, clear night, and the stars were incredible. The next thing I hear, the shed door slams behind me. I turn immediately and try to open it, but it won't budge. Now, from inside the shed, I can hear my dog start to growl, quietly at first, then louder. Now he's barking, and I'm panicking trying to get the door open. I must mention that I'm 6'5" and well built, I play sports, etc., but even ramming my full weight into the door won't open it, and I'm really panicking now as my dog's bark turns into whines, then whimpering, then silence, and with all my might, I slam into the door and it flies open. The light is off inside now, and it's pitch black, it won't turn back on, and I'm in complete darkness. I can't see my dog anywhere, and I stumble around trying to find a torch. Finally, I find it, pick it up, and turn on my torch. I wasn't prepared for what I'd see next. My dog had literally squashed itself into the furthest, darkest corner of the room, eyes closed, and was shaking violently. I immediately moved towards him, and as soon as I got within reach of him, he leapt at me into my arms and wouldn't move. I picked him up, and I swear, I've never run so fast in my goddamn life. I never stepped foot in that shed ever again, and my dog wouldn't even go near that part of the property. I don't know what happened in that shed that night, but I'll never forget it. I was sitting in front of my wood stove, trying out this tree meditation I'd read about. The idea is that you send roots down into the earth, past soil and water, and into the fire of life at the center of our planet, and bring this creative energy up into your body. I got into a nice quiet meditative state and started putting down my imaginary roots, and kapow! I felt something pull on those imaginary roots and pull them down. It was an exhilarating feeling and almost took my breath away. And then I started getting weird sensory input. The only way I can describe it is that I had tree consciousness. I felt the sun in a way I'd never felt before, same with rain, same with the sound of a bird orchestra. And then came the dark night. The winds were intense. A tornado went directly over my house a few years prior, and only one tree survived. It's an old American elm that managed to survive the die-off of American elms and the tornado. It's a survivor. It lost a small branch in the tornado, while every other tree in my yard was snapped in half. I felt like I relived that night from the point of view of the tree. But oh, the stars that shone after all the transformers blew. After seeing and sensing the view of the heavens, I came back into my body. I was incredibly disoriented, so I just sat there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what was going on. I had a journal beside me because I like to write, and so I picked up my pen and put it on paper. I tried to write, but I couldn't. Then I realized I had the pen in my left hand, but I'm right-handed. I switched hands, and then some incredibly shaky writing came out. It was about kindergarten level. And then I felt like my human consciousness flooded back in. I was myself again, an adult who could write. It was a really weird experience, and even now, I feel more of a kindred spirit in most trees than in most people. This happened in 2016. I have an ex-boyfriend, and while we were together, we liked to just listen to music and drive around, discovering new places. We turned into this neighborhood one evening. It was early summer or late spring, around 5 or 6. It's still a bit light outside and fairly warm. On these excursions, I'd usually be using my GPS on my phone. Once we turned into this neighborhood, things got very strange and unusual. What we first notice is that there is no one outside, no one bringing in groceries from the car or coming home from work. No cars on the road were driving, even on all the streets we looked at or drove down. No children were out playing or riding bikes. We mention this to each other, and we begin to look a bit harder. Next, we notice that there is nobody in any of the homes, no lights on in any of the houses, as many of them had big front room windows you could look into. But they were all furnished and had cars in the driveway, like people did live there. We begin to get very weirded out. I am trying to route us out of that neighborhood, but my GPS is completely not working and was showing us driving down roads we weren't on, turns where there weren't supposed to be any, etc. It's like we were going in circles, even though we kept trying to go down different streets to find the main road. Nope. Nothing but eerie, empty houses. I think now that we were stuck in some sort of strange loop. It was reminiscent of a fake neighborhood used to test nuclear missiles. But this was in the middle of Fairfax, Virginia, where there surely would be no nuclear missile test neighborhoods. We both start to panic at this point, like, where the hell are we and why isn't the GPS working? I have always been very good with computers and phones, I am majoring in IT now, and was no stranger to my Google Maps app. We finally found this one road that looked like it led out of the neighborhood. We took it, as it was different from the others. What we discovered next shook us to our bones. It was a dirt road, unlike the others. After driving down it for a moment, we realized it led into a heavily wooded area. It was nightfall at this point, and we had been trying to find our way out for at least 20 to 25 minutes. We have no music on, as I paused it so I could concentrate more on the GPS. We are driving down this road and see a huge house to the right. One light was on inside what appeared to be the upper level midroom. You could see light through the window and a black figure standing there. We are so spooked out at this point. The figure wasn't moving, like it was just watching. We are driving slowly because we both just can't understand what's going on and are looking up into the window. What the duck is that? Then, so quickly and out of nowhere, this white pickup truck begins tailing us, fast. Way too fast to be just simply driving behind somebody on a dirt road at least 50 miles per hour. I'm not kidding you when I say it chased us out of there. My ex is driving, hunching over the wheel while simultaneously looking out his rearview mirror at the truck. I have my back turned, looking out the back car window. You could cut the tension with a knife, as we're both freaking out. What the hell is happening? Drive faster, it's not slowing down. I can't drive much faster on this road, it's shit. We were in a small car. Eventually, the road finally and somehow leads out to the main highway. What the hell? We both breathe a sigh of relief and are just absolutely bewildered by what just happened. We were both sober, and on the ride back, we were both asking each other, that wasn't just me, right? To this day, both of us are freaked out and haunted by this event. We had some other very strange things happen after that as well. We were both sober every time we encountered something like this. But I'll digress for now. Thank you for reading if you've made it this far. This happened to me yesterday morning while I was getting ready for work. I live on the second floor of an apartment building. It was 5:25 a.m., and I was making coffee in my kitchen. I had just filmed a Snapchat video for a relative at my coffee machine when I noticed I was running late. I use a magnetic flashlight attached to my fridge so I can see when I make coffee, and I took it with me on my way to the living room. My apartment isn't big, so to walk to my living room, I just had to turn around. When I turned and began walking, a green light from outside my living room window caught my eye. This window faces my neighbor's large, mostly empty backyard. I stopped walking and stared for a moment. The light looked to be the size of a softball and appeared to be floating at around waist height. It was a bright green, but it didn't appear to be illuminating its surroundings. I caught sight of it while it seemed to be in motion, moving back and forth a short distance at a walking pace. My initial thought was that my flashlight was making a strange reflection, so I turned it off, yet the green light still remained and was still moving. As soon as I realized that it must be something outside, I tried to quickly pull my phone out to record a video. Unfortunately, the Snapchat I filmed earlier was still playing on my phone, and it hindered my ability to be quick, as I had to take a few seconds to delete it before being able to film a new video. When I was finally ready to shoot the video, I looked up, and the light was gone. I looked left and right, outside the window, and saw no sign of it anywhere. This entire encounter probably lasted only 30 seconds to a minute. I've tried explaining it away, but I come up short every time. It could have been a person, it was too dark for me to tell, but it was 5:25 a.m., snowing, and 14 degrees Fahrenheit, so that doesn't make a lot of sense why someone would be out there with a green flashlight. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, and while I don't know my neighbor whose backyard this occurred in, I rarely see him outside doing yard work or maintenance. My one somewhat fitting explanation is that maybe someone has a collar on their outdoor cat with a light to keep track of it. But I've lived here for over a year and never witnessed that before. I've been needing to talk to someone about this without sounding like I'm crazy or jumping to conclusions, so if anyone has any similar experiences or reasonable explanations, I'd appreciate hearing them. Last night I was on the phone with my mom, and she told me to come over for dinner. Everything was going great. Then suddenly she comes out and says, "Janet is going to be there." I was like, "Very funny, Mom. Great one." But in my head, I was thinking, that's really not funny. Why would you say something like that? Then my mom keeps going on with this. "You haven't seen her in forever, it'll be nice, etc." Janet died last year. I have a vivid memory of it. I did not attend the funeral, but I remember everyone talking about it and making a scene of it because she died young. She died of cancer, and I remember her husband coming to visit and being very depressed. I never saw her body or anything, but I'm 1000% certain this woman is dead, and I remember many family members talking about it. I never saw the body or visited her grave, and I wasn't that close with her, so I never had much grief over it. But I have vivid memories of her dying and my relatives being depressed over it. I was really weirded out by my mom on the phone, and finally I came out and said, "Janet's dead, what are you talking about?" And my mom just kept talking like it was ridiculous or like I was kidding around. She jokingly said, "She's back." Or something like that. I asked my dad later on, and he looked at me like I was insane. I also can't find the obituary online, but I never looked for it to begin with. I'm assuming one of three things is happening. 1. My parents snapped from grief and are imagining my dead cousin is coming to dinner. 2. I switched universes where Janet never died. 3. A zombie is coming to dinner. When I was around 8 or 9, my friend and I were on a bike ride through some trails in the woods next to a subdivision. We had biked through here countless times before, and it was just a circle that ran through the woods. At one point, there was a log bridge embedded in the ground for ATVs and the like that crossed a small creek near a blue house that was in the woods for some reason. We crossed the bridge and come back for another lap, only to find no bridge. There is still the creek, still the house on the other side of the creek, but no bridge, just a path veering back to a different road. It was a very strange phenomenon, one that we both still remember and cannot explain. We went back again later, thinking we may have just been losing it, but never found the bridge again. It's also important to note that it couldn't have been removed that quickly, as it only took a couple minutes to make the round of the path. About 2 years ago, a colleague of mine invited me and some of her friends on a 2-day trip to a cabin for the weekend. The plan was to drink beer, eat food, and play board games and Guitar Hero. A nice weekend, indeed. We get there in the early afternoon, around 1600 hours, and start settling in. Some are outside bringing in wood and tending to the fireplace, some are making the beds ready, and some are cleaning the living room or shoveling snow on the porch. In other words, we weren't all in the same room at the same time for the first hour or two. At around 1900 hours, we settled down for dinner. There was a taco on the menu, so it was a collective effort to make it ready, with people cutting up vegetables, cooking the meat, and setting the table. Because we all had a few beers during the time at the cabin, people were constantly going to the outhouse. This meant that the first time we'd been all together in the same room for a good period of time was during dinner. When we ate, the mood was good, and we were all chatty, talking about what we were going to play afterwards and just generally getting to know each other. Because there were so many, we had to use some chairs from the kitchen area and eat in the living room. There was a couch with room for 3 people, one with room for 2, a chair, and 2 chairs from the kitchen. The seating arrangements made it possible for 7 people to sit comfortably without anyone having to use the middle seat in the 3-seater. After the feast of cheese, meat, and salsa, we were all sitting around the table chatting and playing a board game. Suddenly, my colleague asked, "Hey, where is who sat there?" Pointing at the empty living room chair. "Oh, that was. I'm not sure," one of the guys said. "It was that guy from. My colleague answered. We all swore that there were 7 of us on the trip, but we couldn't remember who the last person was. There wasn't a dinner plate for that seating, and it didn't look like anyone had been there. We started to count who came here in what car, and the number we came up with added up to 6. At the same time, we had brought in the 2 chairs from the kitchen because there wasn't room enough in the living room, and we had said no to some people wanting to go on the trip because the cabin only had 7 beds. We were quite sure that there were 7 of us, but there was no evidence of us being more than 6 people. There was no 7th plate, 7th backpack, or anything. Still, we had bought enough food for 7 people, had made 7 beds, and were damn sure that someone had been sitting in the empty seat. We had no recollection of this person, but all agreed it was a man, not a woman. This happened during spring in the far north of Norway, and if it wasn't for the longer hours of daylight and how close the cabin was to our city, we would have been totally freaked out. I still have no idea who the 7th person should be, but I still find it odd that all of us were sure of there being a 7th person, a man, on this trip. I guess he went out of the matrix, and the matrix adjusted itself. I've always been intrigued by these stories, but I actually had something happen to me that can't be explained in a logical way. I was at work and using the women's bathroom. There is a single door into the bathroom that's like a mini hallway with a trash can, and another single door leading into the room full of stalls. I had used the restroom and was washing my hands at the sink on the right. A woman came out of a stall and started washing her hands at the sink to the left of me just as I was leaving. She was a black woman with a medium skin tone, bright yellow pants, and a black cardigan. Her hair was in a distinctive afro ponytail that puffed out at the crown of her head. I left the restroom and tossed my paper towel in the trash bin as I was leaving the door to the mini hallway. As soon as I left the second door out to the main floor, I saw the exact same woman. Down to the hair and the yellow pants. She was just barely disappearing into a door that wasn't owned by the office I worked in across the hall. I know for a fact that the only exit to that bathroom was the one that I took, while the woman was still washing her hands at the sink. I know this isn't too crazy or exciting, but I've been sitting on it for a few weeks trying to find another way to explain it, but the memory is so clear. Yesterday morning, a few guys from work and myself left Denver, Colorado, for Rawlins, Wyoming, on a 2-day business trip. We had met up at work and carpooled in a company car, taking I-25 to I-80, and got to the hotel in Rawlins in the early afternoon. I do not like Rawlins at all, but a very important client operates there, and every once in a while, a few of us drive out there and do these circle jerk meetings with him and his management team. Nothing was different about the drive out, it was just the same boring landscapes taking us to the same hotel as always. What brings me here is what happened this morning. I woke up in La Junta, Colorado. I went to bed in my hotel in Rawlins last night, and this morning I woke up to my alarm and nearly had a panic attack when I realized I didn't recognize the room I was in. I jumped out of bed and saw my suitcase laying on the floor, half unpacked, and I saw in the mirror that I was wearing what I went to bed in. I was about to use the room phone to call the front desk when I saw the address printed on it, La Junta, Colorado. At this point, I had to sit down on the floor and just breathe because I am fairly certain that I had some kind of panic attack, or maybe I went into shock. The next thing I really remember is my cell phone ringing. I answered it, and it was one of the guys I had driven to Rawlins with. He wanted to know where the hell I was, and he reminded me the meeting was in 30 minutes. I asked him where he was, and he said the parking lot, so I asked him what town, and he said, "What the hell, man, we are in La Junta." At this point, I went into autopilot, got ready, quickly met my coworkers in the parking lot, and went to the meeting. It was the guy who I know is from Rollins, but his company is now, for some reason, in La Junta. The management team was all different, but the head guy and the company were the same. I am in my hotel room right now, more terrified than I have ever been in my life. I tried talking to my girlfriend about it on the phone, but even she remembers me having to travel to La Junta to meet with this guy. I am absolutely sure I drove to Rollins yesterday and that this company is based in Rollins. Has anyone experienced something like this? Can anyone explain it? There was this creepy little room at the back of the school stage, no light, small, and it locked from the outside. It gave us the heebie-jeebies. We were joking about going backstage and locking one of our friends in. He flipped his SHT and started hammering on the door. We were all laughing like the bunch of assholes we were back there. Then his screams start mingling with the hammering and shaking of the door. We stop laughing, and we're all staring at the door, then suddenly all noise stops. We're all silent now, and then we start calling his name. No reply. Some of the bolder members of our group open the door and go in. He's not in there. We didn't believe them at first. But it's a tiny room, and he's not there. Then we start screaming his name and searching nearby. We spot him through one of the windows coming towards the building. We can't believe it. We all ran to him. He says we let him out, and we just stared right through him. We were crowding the door to the room that the dark room was in. No way he passed by us. I still have no idea what happened that day. Tonight, I believe my brother and I somehow got into a time loop or deja vu, something odd, and nothing feels right anymore. My brother, 13, and I, 25, were in a car waiting for our family to be done at Walmart. It's about 9:40-ish. We think nothing of waiting and just talk, passing the time as my brother tells me about school and his 6th grade adventures. Mainly about weird kids in class. Keep in mind we are in the back seat of a truck and are in the parking lot of Walmart. Looking to the right, as I'm seated on that side, I see a man wearing a dirty white shirt running with his daughter as they wail, holler, and laugh. Seeing this, my brother and I both laughed because it was kind of funny to watch. On the left of the truck on my brother's side is a blue car. A man is packing that car but taking forever, so we go back to talking. About 2 minutes later, a group of 3 girls walk by the truck laughing and saying random banter that I can't quite remember, something along the lines of someone being so funny. They get in the car diagonal to the truck and laugh before pulling out and leaving. My brother notices the blue car guy finally leaving as well, moments later. He commented by saying, "Finally." Here's the weird part. After we talk a little bit more and laugh with each other, suddenly we hear a familiar wail. I turn to the right, and it was the same dirty white shirt guy running the same path with the same daughter laughing. I said deja vu aloud and felt a little weird. That feeling of what in the world? My brother laughed a bit, thinking I was memeing, until he looked and noticed the blue car guy packing again. We pay no mind, thinking maybe he forgot something, and go about talking again till we hear the laughter of the 3 girls. They load up and pass our windows again. Getting in the car diagonal of us, same outfits, same being so funny. By now my brother and I are looking at each other. I mention it's weird, and why is that guy running the same path twice? My brother says maybe he forgot something in the store. We shake it off, and I look at my dying phone at 2% charge, and we note the time is 9:50. My phone dies trying to load up YouTube, and we laugh and talk. My brother takes the switch after some time and notes that the time is still 9:50. We were talking for at least 5 minutes. We think it's weird to get a little nervous but distract each other with jokes. About what feels like 2 to 3 minutes later, the same white shirt guy and his daughter run out of the store, wailing and laughing. We see it, and now we are worried. Turn to the left, and the blue car is still packing. My brother comments, "Maybe we are in a time loop like you said." Then the girls come out and go to their car again. This time, we do something different. We watch this white shirt guy load up his daughter in his van and talk to the driver for a bit before getting in and pulling out. I was curious to see if they actually left this time. The girls leave next, and finally the blue car. My brother states, if it happens again, we go to the store. We feel like it's been ages waiting till we see our family leave the store and come to the car. They don't believe us, only our father, who likes to read about theories, and then we make note of the time. 9:55 p.m. How did all that happen in, what felt like, at least 20 minutes? How did we see the same people doing the same thing 3 times? We aren't tired, and we both witnessed the same events, and both are in agreement. Our family says they felt strange in the store, but leave it at that. What happened to us? It's been on my mind. Were we in a time loop? Any answers help. Thanks for listening. This happened when I was 11 or 12, I'm 26 now, but the detail of this event has never faded in my memory. I'll start by providing the setting. My friend and I lived in a neighborhood with a large pond nearby. If you hopped the fence in my backyard, you would land 20 feet from the path that circled the pond. Behind the pond was a small forest where we would go on adventures and whatnot. It provided an ecosystem of tree frogs, turtles, lizards, etc., and as kids, we had fun going there and fishing or trying to see if we could catch the tree frogs or turtles. This wildlife was primarily around the pond, but it also extended into many of the properties within a half-mile of it. This is where my story begins. One night, I was staying over at my friend's house, Jake. We were getting bored of watching TV and playing video games, so we decided to see if we could catch some tree frogs at night. We always put them back and didn't harm them, to be clear. Across the street from Jake's house and 3 houses down from mine, there was a nice corner lot with a lot of trees in the backyard. Lucky for us, the family was out of town, so it was the perfect spot to test our skills. We headed out around midnight and started looking for some frogs. I remember getting a very eerie feeling once we were there. It didn't feel like something was watching us, but I don't know, it just felt off. The frogs were extremely loud. It was like a tree frog symphony back there, but we couldn't spot any of them with our flashlights, which was odd. Then they started changing their tone, and this is where it started getting weird. I kid you not, they began saying help me, help me, help me in this deep, froggy tone. At first, they were firing off this phrase randomly, but then it became synchronized, making it very loud. I asked Jake if I was going crazy or if he was hearing them say something too. He said, help me? Yeah, I said. We looked each other in the eyes for a second, and without saying a word, we ran out of the backyard back to the street. We are standing under the street light right where the street makes a T, where Jake's street ran NS and my street ran EU, connecting to his street on the east end. Once we catch our breath, we look up, and there is a congregation of dragonflies, probably 10 to 20. Each one is connected to the next, and they are traveling up towards the light in a spiraling motion. I'm not an expert when it comes to dragonflies, but I hadn't seen that before then and haven't seen it since. At this point, I'm starting to get really uneasy, which seems dramatic, but there was just something about that night in general. That eerie feeling was getting stronger and stronger throughout, and it just felt like something wasn't right. Something was off. We're still under the streetlight looking at these dragonflies and talking about this odd energy in the air when the most unexplainable thing I've ever seen happens right in front of us. I remember having this insane rush of adrenaline come over me. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what, so I turned around, almost certain I would see something. Looking up my street, which is on a hill, we were at the base or bottom of the hill, I saw it and froze. We both did. Right there in the middle of the street was a girl sitting down Indian style, combing the hair of a doll. She was dressed in a white nightgown and had dark black hair, although comparable, not nearly as creepy as the girl in the ring. Jake and I didn't move, we didn't speak, we just stared in disbelief. We had just recently been looking in that direction when we left the house with the frogs, and there was no one there before. How did she get there, and why was she there? After what seemed like an hour, probably 15 to 30 seconds, a car turned onto the street and began heading down the hill towards us and the girl. I remember the headlights getting brighter and brighter as they approached her. You would think maybe I would try to save her real quick, but I couldn't move. I was legitimately frozen, and my mind just couldn't process what I was seeing. Eventually, she became lost in the car's headlights. My adrenaline was going into overdrive now as the car was milliseconds from impact and not slowing down. Part of me was thinking this girl was about to die a brutal death in front of my eyes, but the other part of me was thinking she wouldn't be harmed, and something just wasn't right. Maybe I was hallucinating, I thought. At this moment, I wasn't sure if Jake was seeing this too. Then, the car just passed right through without any sound of a collision, stopped at the stop sign 15 feet from us, and made a right turn. We had taken our eyes off of where the girl was and were looking at the car briefly as it turned. We looked back to where the girl had been, and she was gone. Instead, there was a dog on the sidewalk, exactly the same distance up the street as the girl. It looked at us, then turned around and trotted up the hill in the other direction. After 5 seconds or so, we snapped out of our frozen trance. We looked at each other with our eyes practically popping out of our eye sockets, and we both screamed random obscenities as we bolted back to Jake's house. We stayed up most of the night talking about it, and yes, we saw the exact same things. To this day, I don't tell anyone about that night unless I'm with my buddy to back me up. I've noticed many of you seem to come up with good theories on many of the experiences people have, so if anyone has any ideas or has been through anything similar, I would love to hear them. Maybe about 10 years ago, I was working as a manager at a smallish restaurant chain. I'd been with the company for a while but was fairly new at this location. It was in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, USA, which probably doesn't mean anything to most people. But the 2 jobs I'd had prior in that town are a little locally famous for being haunted. I've had my share of ghost sightings and weird stuff. This was different. The building here had 3 floors. The bottom was an antique store and half of the restaurant, and the second floor was all restaurants. On the 3rd floor was an abandoned ballroom with all glass walls that likely once overlooked a lake behind the property, but a hotel had been built since and blocked the view. Super creepy space, but nobody ever went up there. Might be irrelevant. But that's the property. We had a pretty bad snowstorm this particular day. I'd been shoveling and salting the walkways and went in to start my shift. I'm walking from the kitchen on the 2nd floor down a couple of steps to the dining room area, and something hits me. I squeezed my eyes shut, brought my hands up to my face, fell back a little, and yelled out, "Come on, guys." In the moment, I thought someone had taken a bucket of rock salt and threw it at me. It felt like thousands of little pieces of something hard pelted me throughout my whole body. I was half expecting it to be a prank, but I opened my eyes after a bit, and it was like pulling my shirt to check for salt or something all in my bra because I felt it literally everywhere. There was nothing there. Once I realized I was fine and not covered in a pile of salt, rocks, or whatever, I looked around, and 2 of the waitresses were just staring at me. I stopped setting tables wide-eyed. Because their perspective was that I just stopped, put my hands up to my face to shield it, fell back, yelled out, "Come on guys," and then started pulling my shirt like I was trying to shake something out of it. They saw me react, but nothing would cause the reaction. I'm not sure exactly what that was or could have been. Back when I was in middle school, I would always venture into only the top of these woods, a little ways from my house. It had some short trails and streams running through the very edge of it. Beyond that was just thick forest, too thick for a kid to consider going to venture in. I would always go back there with my close friend, and one day we heard some voices coming from deeper in the woods. I remember so clearly how they sounded. There were several, and they sounded like they were having fun. Laughing, calling names, and the like. It was a hot summer day, and we felt so safe, so we decided to hike back and investigate. Admittedly, that was pretty stupid. Not too far into the woods, we found a giant treehouse. Looking back on it, it was truly ridiculous in size. It had at least 4 floors, all of them running up this gigantic tree, and a ladder on the side of each floor. Each floor was only a single room, but damn, the whole thing was still so big. Most of the people there were boys, one of whom seemed incredibly familiar, but I could never pinpoint who he was or how I knew him. I just did. We never spoke that day, though. However, there was one girl there. Her name was Chanel. She seemed like she was around 16 to 18 and was really pretty. Once she caught sight of us, we started talking, and she eventually gave us a little tour of the tree house. The first floor was empty. I remember the massive amounts of nails and duct tape everywhere to keep everything together. Each room was pretty much the same, except for the very top one. It had a padlock and was all chained up. The only thing Chanel had to say about it was, "That's where, insert boy's name I don't remember here, is. We don't go in there." We all hung out for the rest of the day there. They had a small, burned out fire pit and everything. It was so complex, like something you'd see in a kid's movie. But most of all, it was all so real. The sun began to set, so we all parted ways and went home. Chanel had given me her number that night. The next day, me and my friend went back to see them again, and, I kid you not, every single remnant of that treehouse fort was gone. Not a single nail, plank of wood, or duct tape roll, not even the fire pit, was there. It was like it was never there. I tried calling Chanel, but the number didn't go through. I still have the contacts on my phone from contacts being transferred through phones I've had over the years. I still talk to my friend about the treehouse every once in a while. It wasn't a dream, we both remember. I could show you exactly where it was to this day. I still live in the same area, and I still go back there every once in a while, hoping I'll run into Chanel again or something. I don't know. Any suggestions or explanations? The story I am about to share is 100% true and really happened to me about 15 years ago, believe it or not, but to this day I cannot explain it. When I was 15, my family moved into a rental house. There was always a weird energy about that house. I can't explain it, but something was always eerie about it. It was a beautiful old home, and an elderly widow had lived in it before us. She had been an opera singer and college professor in the arts. Her name was Mrs. Martin, and she became kind of a character in the house that we'd reference often as her children rented us the home with literally all of her belongings still in it. They didn't even clean out the fridge. It was very strange. The house was basically left like the day she passed away. Oh, and the attic was infested with bats. No clue if that's relevant, but it contributed to the spooky factor that was always felt in the house. I never liked staying by myself there, even during the day. On the night of the incident, I was home with my best friend Mallory, 15, her younger sister Olive, 13, and my little sister Emma, 11. Mallory and I were in the living room watching a movie, and Olive and Emma were hanging out in the den, which was a room off of the living room with a door, and they were watching TV. No parents were home at the time. At one point, my sister Emma decided to go upstairs and take a shower. The way the house was set up, there was only one staircase, and you had to walk through the living room to use it. So she came out of the den, walked through the living room, went up, showered, and was up there for maybe a half hour. When she was done, she walked down the stairs in a white towel, stopped on the 6th step, and went, "Hey guys." With a little wave, to which we acknowledged her cheerfully, and then she kept walking down the stairs, through the living room by Mallory and me watching TV, and opened the door into the den and closed it behind her. My mom had been folding clothes down in the den earlier, which is why she came downstairs to get dressed. Maybe 2 to 5 minutes later, Mallory and I are still in the living room, and Olive and we assume Emma are watching TV in the den, when we hear from over our shoulder, "Hey guys." In the same inflection and tone as before, and it's my sister Emma, in a white towel, who had walked down the stairs, was stopped at the 6th step, had her hand up for a small wave, and then went to keep walking down when Mallory and I both gasped, turned, and looked into each other's faces with absolute horror. It happened so quickly, but we both bolted upright, ran to the den, and burst open the door to a startled Olive. Emma was trailing close behind with a "What's going on?" When I opened that door, I truly expected to see another version of my sister sitting in there. But no, it was just Olive. Mallory and I immediately began questioning them. "Emma, didn't you just walk down here a couple of minutes ago?" "Olive, are you sure Emma didn't come into the den just a few minutes ago?" "Emma, did you go downstairs after the shower but then go back up somehow?" But we knew there was no way she could have come back upstairs without walking by us in the living room. It made no sense. Both girls were so confused and were beginning to get scared. They truly had no idea what we were talking about. Emma swore she had only come down the stairs that one time, and Olive swore she had never walked into the den in a towel before we all came in together just then. Because our sisters were so young at the time and we could tell they were getting spooked, we decided to just pretend we were kidding and left them to go back to the living room. I remember sitting in silence and maybe even asking, "You saw that too, right?" And then we never spoke of it again. I honestly didn't even tell my parents or my sister what had happened until a couple of years ago. My sister said she has no memory of it at all. I haven't spoken to Mallory since high school, so I have no idea if she remembers it. All I know is that if Mallory hadn't been there to witness it and have the same reaction I did in that moment, before either of us even spoke a word, I probably would have thought I was losing my mind. I'll never forget the look of horror and confusion she gave me, and I probably gave it right back to her, when Emma came down the stairs that second time. To this day, it still creeps me out to think about it. In the years since, I have read many stories about glitches in the Matrix and seen some about time loops. People witnessing the same event happen twice or more in the same way are usually close together. I believe this is what I and Mallory experienced with my sister that day. We only lived in that house for a year before my parents purchased their own home and we moved. Last year, my sister went back to visit the town and said she drove by that house. Apparently they had split it into 2 homes to rent it out to the college kids. We both agreed that the strange energy forces that existed in that home were probably not too happy to be split in 2. So that's my glitch in the Matrix story. Like I said, it's all the truth. Anyone else ever experience a similar time loop? I was visiting my best friend, who lives in a small mountain town in North Carolina. We always encounter weird things, and I swear he's magical, or cursed. I can't decide. So we're hanging out and having a good time when we decide to go stargazing. It was a clear summer night with a faint breeze. We end up laying down on top of a large hill, far away from any light pollution, when I see this odd little light moving around in all types of strange directions. It's moving at speeds that don't seem possible, shooting across the sky with ease, very different from an airplane or any light I've ever seen in the night sky. I didn't say anything about the light to my friend, and it disappeared. A few minutes later, it's back again, this time changing size and brightness, as if coming in closer and shooting back out again. Finally, I began to ask my friend if he had seen it, but he cut me off before I could even finish asking. Yes, and I saw it the first time too. I was wondering if that was my imagination. The light was definitely confusing, but there was something else that kept catching my eye. There were certain times while staring at the stars when this strange pattern would faintly become visible. The best way I can explain it is that it was almost like a holographic rainbow-colored grid covering the sky. This grid was kind of shaped like honeycombs, all interlocking with each other and spanning across the sky like a sheet. I've never seen anything like it before, and I doubt you ever would in a place with light pollution. Thinking we had seen enough strange stuff for one night, we decided to go inside and watch Netflix. We're sitting on the couch watching some weird TV show about this treasure hunter who tries to find historic artifacts. I remember watching this Indiana Jones wannabe walk through these catacombs and take a turn around a corner, but out of the corner of my eye, I see my friend's cat jump onto the kitchen counter, walk to the other side, and curl up into a ball to lay down. Suddenly my eyes got very heavy, and it felt like I nodded off for half a second, kind of like a long blink. When my eyes opened back up, I was watching the exact same sequence of events happen all over again, literally as if rewatching the last 10 seconds I had just experienced. I was a bit creeped out, but I'm starting to think maybe I'm just tired and not in the right frame of mind. Then I hear my friend say, "Wow, déjà vu," and my heart immediately sinks. I turned to him and said, "What do you mean, what happened?" And he responded, "I closed my eyes for half a second and suddenly rewatched the last 10 seconds of my life repeating itself." I cannot even explain to you the shiver that went down my spine. I was creeped out beyond belief, and I couldn't believe this all took place on the same night. I don't get freaked out easily, but I did not sleep well that night. What do you think, glitch in the Matrix or aliens? A couple of hours ago, I was in the midst of a coding frenzy when my stomach started rumbling constantly. I decided that my coding project could wait a few minutes and that I needed to go grab some food. I live in the western United States, so the nearest place is always a McDonald's. I just wanted some quick food. I wasn't dressed, and I hadn't showered all day, days off, so I wanted to run to the nearest drive-thru and get back. McDonald's, it was then. I picked myself up from the computer, threw a leash on my dog, and headed out. I loaded the dog in my car and turned on the ignition. Outside, there was still a bit of light. The sun had just dipped behind mountains on the horizon, and it was just dark enough to warrant headlights. As I'm winding my way out of my neighborhood, I started to notice that the street lamps kept going out as I passed under them and then coming back on when I'm past them, which I thought was strange, but I chalked it up to coincidence as I've had streetlights go out on me before. I eventually made it to one of the last turns to get out of the neighborhood, but as I pulled up to the stop sign, I felt a wave of something pour over me. I heard my dog whimper. I looked back at her, and she had ducked back into the middle of the back seat, tail between her legs, with her fur sticking straight out. It felt like I went through a thick sheet of static electricity, honestly, and I began hearing a loud feedback noise inside my head, and the world got blurry. This went on for a few seconds before it cleared up. My car had stalled during this time, so I turned the engine back on and made my way past the stop sign. When I pulled out onto the main road, I immediately noticed that the streets were vastly different. They were the usual black, but they had a bright white iridescent color to them as well, lighting up the environment. The streetlights that were usually on the medians on the road were gone as well, replaced by trees. McDonald's was still right by my house. I could see the sign. It was in a different building, though. The building was much bigger than usual, but so far, this is the least strange thing to happen on this drive. So I drove towards it, still very confused as to the sudden change. My dog in the back of my car seemed to acclimate to this change much better, as she was back to sticking her head out of the window and sniffing the air. I pulled up to the only stoplight between me and my destination, and the car in front of me was something I had never seen before. The logo on the back was a silver circle with what looked like a silver Sicilian eagle in the middle. On the eagle's chest was the letter G in a cursive font. The model of the car was Vapor. The license plate was the same as any other, though, so I go through the light, still wondering what the hell happened when I reached the McDonald's. I get to the drive-thru menu, which is all LCD screens updating to show featured menu items and looping GIFs of people smiling while they eat. My usual is still on the menu, though for $2 more than I'm used to paying for it, so I order that. I pull up to the window with my credit card out and at the ready so I can pay. The worker opens the window and greets me. I greet him and hand him my card. He looks at it and then back at me and says, "We don't accept that here," and then hands me a gadget that reminded me of my dad's blood pressure monitor. I guess I was supposed to put my finger in it, but I was so thrown off that I just asked, can I just pay with cash? Cash? Sure, I guess. So I hand him $20, and he inspects it for longer than anyone should, and then proceeds to give me my receipt without my change. When I asked him about the change, he looked at me with a very confused face and said, "We don't have cash at this location, sir. We can only give cash vouchers." Oh, okay. So I look at my receipt, and lo and behold, the bottom of it says, cash value, $11.26. Good enough for me, I guess. I pull up to the next window. After waiting for a few minutes, the next worker opens up his window with my bag of food in his hand and a big smile on his face. He hands me the bag, and I put the receipt in it out of habit. He then says to me, "Oh, wait, I forgot your fries. Can I have the bag back, please?" So I hand him the bag, and a few seconds later he returns and says, "I hope you have a great day. I made this spes for my great day." Sp. This went on for a few seconds. His face and body motions were moving and resetting, like when you tilt an N64 game slightly out of the console. I didn't have time to be terrified during the moment because, as this happened, I felt the wave of electricity come over me again. Just like last time, I heard my dog whimper, and when I looked back, she was crouched in the back, her fur extended. And just like last time, I heard a loud feedback noise in my head. My eyes took a second to adjust, but when the world came into focus, I saw that I was in a parking lot. I recognized everything. This was the parking lot in which the McDonald's I'm used to is placed. And sure enough, the McDonald's was visible in my rearview mirror at its usual location. So I go through and buy food again. My $20 was missing, as was my cash voucher or whatever, and I drove back. I have no clue what happened, honestly, and I wanted to get as much of the detail out as I could while it was fresh in my thoughts. This happened while I was in high school. I was driving my mom's car with my best friend in the passenger seat. On the drive home, there is this hill that my friend and I refer to as the hill at the end of the world. We live in a suburban but woodsy area. This particular hill isn't very big, but the incline of it and the way it curves a bit just at the top make it so you can't really see the other side at all until the very last moment when you've driven over the top. Until that moment, it almost feels like you're going to just drive into the sky. Also, at the bottom of one side, there is a cute little cemetery, for whatever that's worth. On either side of the road, there are just light woods and some spaced out little ranch-style houses in the distance, no sidewalk, and no shoulder. There are cars driving in front of me and in back, as well as coming in the opposite direction. We're driving in the direction of the cemetery. I see the car in front of me crest the hill and disappear below my line of sight. Then I crest the top of the hill, and just there, right in front of me on the other side, is a man standing calmly in the middle of my path, looking out into the woods. I had seen him so late that I didn't have time to react at all. There is no time to brake or even try to turn the wheel. We drove right through him. But then there was nothing. No sounds, no bumps, nothing in my rear view mirror, no evidence of anything being there at all. Traffic didn't stop, and the cars in front of me drove as normal. I was so confused. I just stared forward, trying to process. My friend turns to me and goes, "Did you just see that?" I turned to her and said, "Did you just see it too?" We pulled over, cars still passing us, and walked back to look. There was nothing. No marks or damage on the car. Nothing abnormal is on or around the road. Just nothing. We tried to make sense of it. How could someone have gotten there in the space between me and the car ahead of me? Where would they have come from? They would have had to sprint out of the woods, and the man we saw was standing calmly, almost daydreaming. WTF happened? So when I was about 7 or 8, my brother and I shared a room and slept in bunk beds. One evening I had a bedtime of 8:30ish, so I was in my room with the lights off and a little reading light on because I was doing school reading before bed. I know for a fact that my parents and brother were in front of the house watching TV, and I was alone in the back, where the room was. I was starting to read when I heard what sounded like a scratch at my door, faint but still enough to make me curious. So I sat really still and listened. Again, a faint scratch, but a little harder this time. So I call out, "John? Dad? Mom?" No answer. Then, a few minutes later, I heard it again, but this time it was absolutely my door and someone's nail. It sent chills down my spine. As I sat frozen in my bed, the scratching began to go from slowly drawn out, like 3 or 4 seconds long, and sounded like it was going from top to bottom of the doorway. If you could imagine the standard door with 4 indents for design, someone would just scratch from the top of the top row to the door handle level. It started out every 5 seconds for a few seconds. Then stop. A few seconds later, it started. Then, when I fearfully called out if it was my parents or brother ducking with me, I got no answer. But the freakish part was right, as I did that, the scratching immediately got quicker. Louder and aggressive, so loud that I don't understand how my family didn't hear it happening. Still, it continued until it suddenly stopped, and then I heard the door handle start to rattle, then turn slowly. Now this part is important. I was laying under the reading light when everything popped off, but when the door handle moved and I got scared less, I dove to the side of the bed where my pillows were and covered myself. I remember not hearing much but faintly hearing movement in the room. Suddenly something or someone pulled the covers where my feet were up so as to reveal my face hiding where I would have been reading, but it was just my feet, so I screamed bloody murder for my parents, and like 15 seconds later they got in there and reassured me that no one was there but us. The weird thing is that they just think I was asleep. They tell me that my brother was in the room with them the whole time. They were watching a movie. They had it kind of loud, so they wouldn't have heard scratching or, apparently, me yelling for them. I slept in my mom's room for a week, I think. They tried every night to convince me it was a bad dream, but I know I was awake, I know I heard the scratches, I know I saw the door move, someone ripped the blanket, and their hand hit my foot when they did it. I don't talk about it with family anymore because they just brush it off, but of all the paranormal or creepy things I have experienced, this is the only one I can't logically explain at all. I grew up in a wee village on the west coast of Ireland, and our childhood tales were filled with stories of the good people, what older folk called the fairies. My older brother and older cousin and I were visiting my grandma one Christmas Eve. We went out to take a look at the turkey that was hanging by its feet from a hook in the ceiling of his dark wooden shed. The turkey was plucked and looked horrifyingly big and scary to my 8-year-old eyes. Just as we inch up to the turkey and I'm about to reach out to touch it, they run from the shed and bang the door shut from behind them. I freaked the duck out. Hollering. Banging. Screaming. Kicking the door. And then, suddenly, I just go quiet. And crouch back by the wall. I knew what I was doing. I wanted to scare them. Their laughter stopped. They called my name. I knocked on the door a time or two. I stayed stum. Nervous laughter from outside the door. I didn't breathe. Another minute or two, and they're barreling through the door. Deep into the shed, looking for me. I quietly stepped out and was about to lock them in when I decided to just go back into my grandma's house. I sat next to him at the table. My brother and cousin come running in. I'm terrified that I've disappeared. I just sat there. How'd you get out? They asked. He's been here all the time. My grandma said, without missing a beat. They protested, but we locked him in the shed. My grandma got them to tell the tale, and then we all went out to look in the shed. No way anyone could escape from the shed, he said, before adding, be careful of the good people, lads, they'll often look just like regular folk, and you have to be on your best behavior or they'll steal you away. To this day, nearly 40 years later, I've never told either my brother or cousin what happened. My relatives poke fun at them every now and then because, as kids, they told everyone they'd seen one of the good people and trapped him in a shed. My brother and cousin laugh good-naturedly, but you can see that question's still burning in their eyes. What the hell did we see that day? I'll start by saying that when I was in my late teens, I used to live in a small town just outside Hamburg, not far from my girlfriend at the time. We used to spend a lot of time together and go out for lots of walks, as neither of us had cars. Every few days, I would walk her to her Fahrschule, driving school, just up the road. Her classes always started pretty late into the evening, and it was winter in Germany, so the days were very short and it got dark early. I used to hate it when she would walk there alone. Furthermore, after dropping her off at her classes, I always tried to be there to walk her home as well. I would simply depart after dropping her off and return after the duration of her class. This is where SHT gets weird. One particular evening I dropped her off as normal. It was only about a 20-minute walk, traversing a quiet wooded park and a few short side streets to get there. I left to go back home for about an hour or so, then departed early so that I could catch her before she left. For some reason, I arrived especially early this time, and I had to wait outside for about 20 minutes. It was very dark, and I was simply sitting at the bus stop across the street from the school. I waited and waited and waited, and she just wasn't exiting the doors to the school. I sat outside for probably 35 minutes just waiting there. It should also be noted that I didn't have my phone on me at the time. I had thought it would be a quick and easy excursion, so I didn't bring it, clearly a mistake. At this point, I, of course, started to ponder. Has she already left? I must have missed her. She should be finished by now. Etc. After about 40 minutes went by, I started contemplating heading back the way I came to see if she was walking alone, but I didn't want to risk it just in case she hadn't actually left. So I remained there, waiting nervously. This is the really weird part. So I'm sitting there, tapping my foot, and I see two people with flashlights walking up the street from the opposite direction, apparently looking for someone. I was like, WTF? I got up and approached to see what was going on. The two people searching were my girlfriend, who I was waiting for, and her mother. As soon as they saw me approaching, they said, "There you are. We've been looking all over for you. Where the hell have you been, and what the hell were you doing back there?" I said, "What do you mean? I've been here for 40 minutes, waiting for you to leave school. Where did you two just come from? What's going on? I finished early today and started walking back alone. I wasn't able to contact you, because I had no phone, but I saw you following me. Why are you back here now? This isn't funny." I was dumbfounded. "What are you talking about? I have been right here for 45 minutes straight." Now, this is what my girlfriend saw from her perspective. After leaving slightly early from her class that day, she began walking astutely back home after noticing I hadn't arrived to pick her up yet. Assuming she would bump into me on the way, she wasn't worried about walking alone, and she confidently began heading home. She spotted me from about 500 meters away and witnessed me crossing the street, which I had actually done while walking towards the school. She expected me to approach her and greet her, but it seems I didn't notice her across the street, and we walked right by one another. This was the last time she actually saw me before meeting me again at the bus stop. Regrettably, I used to be quite the prankster. I was always teasing and messing with her, so she assumed that's what I was doing then. She thought I was intentionally ignoring her so that I would sneak around and scare her or something. Either way, she didn't call my name because she thought I was being a shit. The creepy part. So after that initial interaction, I shortly thereafter arrived at the bus stop and proceeded to wait. She, on the other hand, had a very eventful walk. After she saw me initially, she kept walking towards home, expecting me to jump scare her or whatever, and her expectations seemed to be fulfilled. She began hearing footsteps behind her, about 10 meters away. She knew it was me just ducking with her. She then looked back, and what she saw was me following her in my exact outfit, walking exactly how I walk, just following her and staring at the ground. According to her, it was my exact face, hair color, and even physical demeanor. To her, it was beyond the shadow of a doubt that I was following her. So damn strange. The doppelganger said nothing, never looked up, and kept a consistent 10 meters behind her. He followed her for a few minutes down the road, just being creepy. She of course turned forward again and laughed at my supposed pathetic attempt to scare her, but after an amount of time, she started getting weirded out and wondering what I was doing. Shortly thereafter, the footsteps stopped, and she lost me around a bend in the road. She looked back, confused, and even called my name to no avail. She shrugged and continued forward through the wooded park near her home. It was a very quiet, dark, and creepy park, but she powered through it, a quick reminder that this entire time I was actually sitting at the bus stop. About halfway through the small park, she hears footsteps again, but they are much faster and heavier. She turns around to once again see me sprinting towards her full tilt. Baggy jeans, heavy sweater, just sprinting as fast as I could. She saw my eyes glaring into hers and like staring into her soul. At this point, she was startled. She didn't know what was happening, and I was apparently booking it straight for her. As the doppelganger got about 10 meters away, he turned and ran down another pathway in the park. Running towards a non-lit, pitch-dark section of the park. Sprinting as fast as he could. Like, what? She watched as I sprinted into the darkness and faded from view. The immense confusion sparked some worry in her. She was almost home, and I thought maybe I was running around to meet her on the other side of the park or something. She also just wanted to get the hell out of that creepy-ass park. She really gave the doppelganger the benefit of the doubt that night, though. So she arrives home, asks her mother if I'd arrived, and sure enough, I never showed up. She tells her mom the whole story, and they begin to worry that something is wrong. They waited a few minutes, then decided to look around for me. When their attempts failed, they thought to look around near the driving school again, and that's where they found the real me at the bus stop. That's basically the whole story. It was extremely peculiar, and since that day, about 6 years ago, I've been wondering what the hell it could mean. I've heard that doppelgangers are omens of death, but lately I've been thinking maybe it was some elaborate glitch or some kind of intersection of universes. What do you guys think? I hope you thought this was as interesting as I did. About 5 years ago, when I was around 15 years old, my entire family lived in one home for a brief period of time. My mom, dad, sister, half-sister, and her 4 children. My dad was at work, and my mom and sister were in the kitchen. Around midday, my half-sister took her kids outside to walk to the park down the street. As usual, one of us in the house would go to lock the door behind whoever left. So I heard my sister yell, "Bye, be back later." And I got up after a few moments to lock the door. On my way there, I glanced into the living room. My 3-year-old nephew was sitting on the floor, playing with toy cars, facing away from me. Everything seemed to fall silent for about 5 seconds, like I could literally hear a ringing in my ears because of the lack of sound, and then return to normal. I sighed and turned to lock the door, opening my mouth to yell for my mom. I was about to complain to her about being left to babysit without first being asked if I was busy. As I turned back around from the door, my nephew was no longer there. His toy cars remained in the exact spots they were in before, as if his body had just been teleported away. I immediately felt odd and ran to the window, where I saw my sister and all 4 of the children on the sidewalk, including my 3-year-old nephew. Originally, I might have dismissed this as my mind playing tricks on me, but I stood and looked at him sitting there for several seconds. It wasn't a quick glance, and then I turned around. I glanced, did a double take, and stared for a while before turning to lock the door. And before anyone asks, there wasn't any way for him to get out onto the sidewalk besides the front door. We lived in an apartment on the 2nd floor, and if I'm standing in the doorway, how would he have gotten past me? I still have no explanation for this day. The second story happened a year or 2 prior to the above. It was about 7 p.m., and my mom, dad, sister, and I were just getting home from shopping and eating out. It's sort of hard to explain, but with 2 cars, the only other available parking spot for our building was next to the dumpster enclosure. There were 2 dumpsters inside of 2 6-foot-tall concrete walls, with metal doors on both sides. There were clasps at the top of the door, but they were rarely used, as the doors were heavy enough to stay shut on their own. Next to the dumpsters are 2 parking spots, with grass beyond that, and a metal fence that separates the apartment complex from the neighboring field of dense orange groves. The metal fence was torn up from the ground at the bottom, allowing mischievous teenagers and/or dogs to crawl underneath and through to the other side. So anyway, we were parked next to the dumpster, and my sister and I got out of the car to wait for our parents, who seemed to move slower than molasses. We were both standing behind the car, facing the fence. All of a sudden, we both heard a scuffling coming from the opposite side of the dumpster, and then we saw something I will never forget. A miniature cowboy. Not a Toy Story Woody doll, nothing like that. An actual grown man, just scaled down to about 2.5 feet tall. This was not a dwarf. The proportions and face were those of a chiseled and handsome, thin yet muscular gentleman. Just completely scaled down. He was wearing scruffy jeans, cowboy boots, a vest, a button-down, and a cowboy hat. None of which looked like toy doll clothing. He was literally just a miniature man. He ran out of the dumpster, looked at my sister and me for a few moments, then continued running and dove down under the fence into the orange groves. Now, it was completely dark out by that time, but we saw him so clearly because a giant fluorescent light was positioned above the carport, facing down into the dumpster area. Our mom and dad were barely getting out of the car as my sister and I turned to each other, mouths agape, in disbelief of what we had just witnessed. We heard and saw the exact same thing, and we went over it and over it countless times that night and several times since. We agree on everything that transpired. We actually heard the leaves crunch under his feet as he ran. The fence was wobbling after he brushed past it. The door to the dumpster was completely open. What on earth were we looking at? How could a fully grown, Wild West looking man be 2.5 feet tall with normal proportions? Why did it run? And there's something else. An old, abandoned house situated within the middle of the orange groves had burned down years before, and a cleanup crew was finally being deployed to toss out the remains. Although we never saw any of it ourselves, word spread throughout our town that mini furniture and cookware were found among the burned wood. Most people assumed something creepy, like weird people obsessed with dolls or something like that. But my sister and I automatically thought of the miniature man. I'm not sure that the second completely qualifies as a glitch, but it wasn't scary. Just troubling. We knew what we saw, yet we had no idea what it even was. And I don't know how it's possible that we both saw the exact same thing. This one remains unexplained. So one night I'm home alone, I go to bed, and I fall asleep. Later, during the night, I wake up thirsty. So I go downstairs to get a drink since our house is old and I don't like lead poisoning. The city has since replaced our water pipes, but this was a while ago. Because our house is older, most of the rooms on the first floor are also pass-through rooms. The kitchen has 2 entrances, one that connects to the dining room, which then connects to the living room, the front door, the stairs, etc. The other end connects to the back hall, and then the back door, garage, and basement. They're on opposite sides, and each has a light switch for the kitchen light. I go into the kitchen and turn on the light switch by the dining room door. I get my drink, put the cup in the sink, and go to leave the room. I turn off the light as I leave, and immediately after, the light turns on again. I assume I just fumbled the switch and went to turn it off again. Except it is off. I turn around and see that the switch on the other side of the room is on. And these are not easy to flip switches. They're old and heavy plastic switches that require a fair bit of force to flip. Something actively flipped the switch. I noped out of there stupidly fast. I closed the kitchen door, threw dining room chairs in a pile against it, triple-checked that all windows and doors were locked, then sped upstairs with my cat and hid on my bed. My cat fell asleep because she's old, I did not. A few hours later, my cat wakes up. And at the same time, I hear creaking, which means someone or something is going up or down the basement stairs. Specifically, for a person, the stairs creak differently based on the weight applied. My cat hisses in that direction, something she rarely does. She only hisses when she actively hates or is deathly terrified of whatever it is, and I've only heard her hiss at maybe 7 things over her lifetime. She's 17 now. The stairs stop making noise after the thing makes it to the top or bottom. It was too far to make out if it was going up or down. My cat stared at where the stairs were for a few more hours but eventually went to sleep. I still did not. To this day, I don't know what the hell that was. A couple of years ago, I lived with my parents in a very small town that consisted of only a gas station, a post office, a church, and many farm homes. It's a small town, about 30 minutes from a military base. My parents' home is about a mile down a gravel road from the main highway and only a mile from the center of the town, where this church, gas station, and post office are. One night we were hanging out on the front deck while my little sister and her friends got some senior photos done in the front yard. Seeing as we have about 2 acres of yard and we're kind of in a bowl surrounded by woods, it was a beautiful place to take photos. It's about the golden hour, which is right before the sun goes down, and it kind of starts to get a little cloudy like a storm is rolling through, but everyone is still outside hanging out nonetheless. But as time goes on, it looks as if the storm is building up and it's getting pretty windy, so we rush over and help the photographer and the girls gather up all of the equipment and props they were using to take photos, and by this time, it's starting to get dark anyway. Well, it starts raining a little and the wind is picking up a bit, so all of the girls run inside, as does the photographer with the camera and whatever equipment they could all carry, but leaving a framed backdrop outside that me and my mother told them we would take down and put up in the rain so everyone else could get inside. So as me and my mom are struggling to disassemble the frame for the backdrop while getting a little wet in the rain, we hear a faint sound through the woods. It sounds almost like music, which wasn't very odd because right through the woods, about a mile away, was the highway, and right across the highway was the church, so it wasn't very strange that we would hear music or singing in that direction. So here we are getting the frame and the backdrop packed up and thrown onto the front porch, and from the first time we heard this singing or music, only 10 seconds had gone by, and we heard it again. And once again, we didn't think much of it and were still going into the yard to grab any other random things left out there, like stools or someone's shoes, etc. Well, another 10 seconds go by, and once again we hear this singing, which by now is a little bit louder and we can now tell it is singing. And it's the same 4 to 6 notes over and over again, so it's like someone is singing a short tune over and over again, but only in Oz, so ah 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 like Ariel the Little Mermaid would sing type deal. And so at first, like I said, it was so faint and sounded so far away that we really thought it was the church. But at the end of the last note, it would restart back over to the first ah note, and this time would be a little louder. And so every time the tune would restart, it was a little louder and sounded a little closer. And so by now, we were finished picking up the yard and completely mesmerized by what we were hearing. This tune is getting louder and louder each time it is sung back over again, and to give you a visual, we are standing by the garage, facing into the yard, which is about an acre long, and looking out toward the tree line, which, through this tree line, like I said, was the church across the highway. So it's almost dark but still light enough to see the tree line, and this tune is getting louder and louder, slowly sounding as if it is coming closer and closer. But at this point, it definitely sounds like it is coming from inside the forest and no longer from the church. So me and my mom start talking about, okay, maybe there are people in the forest chanting this song or something because, where we live, there have been reports of cult activity in the woods. So naturally, this is both of our first thoughts if it isn't coming from the church, but one thing we can't explain is the sound the voice is actually making. It doesn't sound like a group of people. It doesn't sound like 20 different voices coming together and harmonizing and singing the same notes over and over again. Instead, it sounds like one person, neither male nor female. Yet it's almost as if this one person has been cloned 20 times and 20 of the same voices are coming together to harmonize and sing this tune. That's what was most creepy about this, and obviously the fact this is happening at all is creepy as well. So here we are, almost paralyzed, staring at the tree line and listening to this Ariel-esque over and over again, getting louder and louder as the 20 same voices start the tune over. So by the end of the last note, it restarts, and when it does, it sounds louder and closer than before. After about 10 times of this mysterious song playing over and over again, getting louder and closer as it plays, it sounds as if the 20-person clone singing group is right on the tree line, just standing behind the trees. And I don't mean I can physically see anyone. Just the tune is so loud at this point that it sounds as if it's coming from right on the tree line. And of course, as soon as the last note ends, it starts back over to the beginning and is even louder now. And this time, it sounds as if it is surrounding us, coming from all directions, and no longer paralyzed. Me and my mom are now in fear, and we both look at each other and sprint to the front door and shut and lock the door behind us. Both in the kitchen are now breathing heavily, looking at each other and trying to understand what we just experienced. We are completely and entirely frightened and also amazed. We both heard the same thing, the same exact thing, 20 cloned voices, neither male nor female, singing the same 4 notes over and over again. With every beginning of the tune, it gets louder and closer, and eventually it gets so loud that it literally surrounds us. To this day, me and my mom haven't found anything like it on the internet. Nothing even comes close to explaining what we experienced. I haven't come across another person's experience that even comes close to what we heard. It's like whatever we hear and experience is so unique. But I've done so much research and still years later, I cannot explain any of what we heard. And so here I am typing this here, so maybe find at least one person who has experienced something similar, or has read something that is similar to this experience, in mythology, in someone's person account on another forum, anything? It's just one of the most mysterious things that's ever happened to me, and the fact that my mother was standing with me and hearing the exact same thing with me at least lets me know that I actually did hear this and it was 100% real. I would love to hear anyone's thoughts or ideas on this matter. Anything is welcome. In July 2016, I was returning from having a meal out with some work colleagues. It was about 9:30 p.m. I was using the usual route I take to get home from work, and I left the M1 motorway onto a roundabout and took the exit that leads to the village I live in. The road I take is about 1.5 miles long and is quite steep in parts, with fields and hedges on one side and some stone walling all the way up to the next village. On the other side of the road is a pub and a small farm, used, I believe, as a house only, and as the road gets steeper on my left is a wooded area with fields after that. The trees are dense with foliage at that time of year. Those fields to my right always look beautiful and golden in the summer, and I absolutely love driving that road at certain times of the year and certain times of the day. The light was just stunning because the day had been hot and it was all muted colors. Still beautiful and warm. At 9:30 p.m., there is little if any traffic and no farm vehicles to get stuck behind. As I approach the steeper part of the road, I change gears. Because of the tree line at that point, it's slightly darker on that part of the road. I very suddenly noticed movement to my left, and when I turned to look, I saw what I can describe as a huge deer running alongside my car, keeping pace, and with its head turned, staring in at me. A lot of things were going through my head. I was concerned I would run it over. Would I be in some kind of trouble with the police? Was it dangerous to me? Could it damage the car, make me crash, etc.? It ran with me for no more than a minute but suddenly rose slightly and shot off into the tree line to the left, and as it did, there was what appeared to be, the only way I can describe it, some kind of weird wiggly mirror, similar to a mirror with water on it. And that was it. I've been asked a couple of questions since I wrote it down this morning, so, for clarification, I did not have missing time. I did not see the animal actually run into the mirror thing. I think it must have. I did not feel or sense anything different in the environment, like a sudden lack of animal noises, etc. It was pretty still and humid, but that was the kind of day it was. It didn't so much frighten me as make me think, what the actual frick? I was not afraid of driving that road again, and I do it very regularly. It has not changed me, but it did open me up to another kind of experience in 2022. I don't know this for sure, but I feel it did. I just wanted to share it again today, as I feel quite bold that I have shared it once. I've not talked to many people about this, in fact, only a couple, and one was someone who worked for the National Trust, who I thought might be able to explain what I may have seen, but he could not find an answer for the experience. This happened around 8 years ago. My 2 teenage male cousins were staying over at our house for the weekend during their summer break. So instead of going out for a drive, my mom suggested we walk to a KFC in our neighborhood. It was about an hour and a half. Seeing the weather was nice and having too many hyper-teen cousins, we went for it. We reached and had dinner, then made our way back home again. This time, we started going through alleyways between houses as a shortcut instead of the main street route. As we were passing the last alleyway shortcut before continuing back on the main road, I felt a weird sensation, like a faint magnetic pulse wave through me. My mom and cousins later confirmed the same sensation at the same spot. We emerged on the main road, and it was dead silent. Yes, it's a housing neighborhood with mainly villas around, but it was dead silent, like the world was put on mute, and everything seemed very familiar but quite weird at the same time. The roads and houses looked way older, they had cracks in them, and the paint was almost completely faded away or chipped. To our left was a roundabout, which was now completely gone, and there were freakishly tall trees in its place. To our right was the road that we had to take to get back to the house. We could see the small grocery store we passed on our way to KFC, yet the neon lights were much brighter and in different colors. Not a single car, person, animal, bug, or bird was around us. We stood there, bewildered by it all. My mom lived in this area before I was born, and we can basically navigate blindfolded through it. It's not the first time we take shortcuts, and it's usually alive with people or stray cats. 24/7 I thought we could go back and retrace our steps, but when we looked back at the alleyway we came from, it was pitch black darkness, and it was just emitting creepiness. My mom just said to keep walking back to the house, and from our location to the grocery store up front, it would usually take 5 minutes or 10 minutes if you were walking super slowly. I glanced at the time, and it was 9:30 p.m. We walked for what felt like 30 minutes while the store wasn't getting any closer. It was like we were walking on a thread while staring at a large image. We finally started to get closer, and I glanced at my watch again, and it was 9:32 p.m. 2 minutes only? And even on normal days, that distance would take at least 5 minutes if you were walking really fast. In 2 minutes, you have to sprint like an Olympic gold runner. As we passed by the grocery store, it was still open. They usually close quite late, but it felt different. The setup inside was slightly changed, and the freakiest thing is that we couldn't see a single person inside even though all the lights were on and the doors were wide open. We were joking around to lighten the mood, but we were all obviously freaking out but trying to maintain our cool. We made it down 2 roads and finally reached the house. My mom tried the gate key, but it wouldn't open. Then I tried it, and I was struggling to get the key in. It was like the cylinder had been changed. Suddenly, I felt like it got sucked in, so I opened the lock and got in. I had quite a few pet cats then, and they usually run up to us when we get back to the house. This time, only a few of them were around, and they kept a huge distance away from us while standing still and staring at us like they had seen a ghost. The rest were hiding around, looking scared. I remember going to my room and sitting on my bed, looking out of my window, trying to make sense of what happened, but I couldn't shake the creepy feeling. The world felt dead, not a single sound, not even a breeze, and the trees were still like rocks. Everything had an eerie feeling to it. I looked at my clock again, and it was around 9:40 or 9:45 p.m., which, again, is impossible for the distance we covered. It's like time has just insanely slowed down around us. I forced myself to sleep that night, and when I woke up in the morning, everything was back to normal, including time flow. I went out for a drive to backtrack our steps, and it was back to normal. Everything was clean and new, the roundabout was back, and not a single tree was there. Whenever I remember that day, my eyes tear up. It creeps me out to think of getting stuck in that place with no return. We used to own a racetrack in Ohio years ago, but we lived in southeast Pennsylvania. You had to take the turnpike to get there in any reasonable amount of time, and one of the times my mother, my sister, and I were together to go meet my stepdad, who was driving separately with a trailer to haul equipment. We got off at an exit after paying a toll and went off into a strip mall with a bunch of rinky-dink looking buildings. Not dirty, just faded pastel colors. It didn't even look like there was a town nearby. They had a diner, though, and we hadn't eaten since we left, 4 hours before, so we stopped in. The food sucked and was completely tasteless. People stared at us the whole time. It wasn't dark, like a cave, just not a ton of windows. There were some, enough for ambient light. Like a Denny's if the power went out, that sort of thing. And an unreasonable number of people, we noticed, had bandages on them. The only person who said a word to us was the girl who took our order, who also rang us up at the end. We decided not eating was better than going back there, so we wrote down the exit in a little journal we'd been keeping in the glove compartment so we knew not to make that mistake again. A couple hours later, we get to the track, and my stepdad asks how everything went. We said it was uneventful but told him we'd recorded a real whopper for the journal and not to take the exit we'd marked because it was Shitsville. He gets really excited, and we're all kind of wondering why. He's actually said the words before, "I hate eating." It takes too much time and gets in the way of me living my life, so our less than stellar review definitely wasn't a motivating factor. He tells us he thinks we ate ghost food and that the people in the diner were vampires. He wouldn't stop talking about it for like 10 minutes, and it was making my sister uncomfortable, so my mom did an about face and tried logicking him away from it. We argued that the food had no reason to suck, they could have easily killed us, and nobody could recall ever seeing a movie where the wound, left by whatever bit the person did to make them vampires in the first place, still existed on their body. He got less excited and left it alone. We have the race weekend, it's time to drive all the way back. He asks me if I want to come with him since he had to drive alone all the way there. I say sure. 2 hours in, he pulls off. I think it's weird because we had a gigantic ducking breakfast before we left, and I know he's anti-eating. I didn't recognize it at first coming from the other direction, but eventually it occurs to me that he's going to the diner's exit. He wants to see it for himself. He stops to pay the toll, doesn't mention our story, and asks if there's a diner at the exit to make sure he has the right one. You can't see it from the ramp. The guy says there was one, but it burned down. Holy shit. Okay, so there weren't vampires, but what a ducking coincidence. We just eat there, and then right after, in the span of 2.5 days, they have a freak accident. This almost intrigues him more than the supernatural bit, and I am 100% on board for checking it out. We drive over to the same humdrum bullshit strip mall, except where we went to eat. It's just this charred mess. Not like with holes in it, it wasn't a wooden frame in pieces like a cartoon, you could seriously tell there was damage. No vehicles, no tape, I'd assume they'd at least test it for being a crime, and they'd clean the area around it well. We go to get back on the turnpike, and these poor toll guys are stuck in a booth hardly bigger than they are, so it's the same dude getting back on, hard to explain, but it's a short ramp, straight road perpendicular to the turnpike, guy's booth, lots of straight, then you can turn into the strip, so you see him again and then fork back. Anyway, my stepdad's like, I thought you said there was a diner there. Guy says there was, like I told you, burning down. He asked if they'd figured out yet what caused it, was it a grease fire or what, that kind of thing. The guy says, yet? Yeah, it had to have been in the last 2 or 3 days, they didn't investigate it? It wasn't on the news. Then the guy says, oh, we know what happened. It was on the news when it happened 8 years ago. It sounds ridiculous and cliché, and there are tons of stories like it. I know what I saw, it was the same exit, the same distance from the road, and the same buildings, save for one. I don't expect anyone to ever believe me, which is why I don't usually share it. Plus, there's no way to prove it because I moved to Florida by the time I was old enough to drive, and I don't have the exit number anymore. It was after Somerset and before Wheeling. But that's almost an hour's difference, so even that's no help. All that I really think happened is that the place burned down like a mother ducker while we were gone, and that guy's just an asshole. I don't think it burned down in the past, and I don't think that I ate ghost food. But my stomach dropped like crazy, and it's still a weird coincidence, especially given how good a job they did cleaning up the site and how quiet everything was around it. It really did look lost in time. I guess I should start with a little background information. I live in central Pennsylvania. Anyone who knows anything about Pennsylvania knows we're associated with two things. Philly cheesesteaks. And mother ducking goddamn white-tailed deer. No, seriously. They're everywhere. They are so overpopulated that if you accidentally bag too many during hunting season, no one is going to turn you in because there's like a billion of them. Anyway, onto the experience. I got off work at 7 the other night and was making my 15-minute drive home when a doe came out of the woods into the middle of the road. I didn't hit her. It was so rainy that I was driving extra slowly. Something wasn't right. She wasn't walking right. She wasn't limping, but she looked like she was injured. I watched her cross the road and go back into the woods. I'm not sure what made me do it, but I pulled over and got out of my car, taking my phone with me, and followed the doe. I followed her tracks along the path that teenagers often use to hide in the woods and drink. I couldn't see or hear her. It was raining too hard, and my phone's flashlight isn't too fantastic. After walking for about 10 minutes, her track stopped. Just stopped. Maybe she went into the leafy part of the woods or something. I didn't know. Instead of continuing my investigation, I walked back to my car and got in. When I turned it on, the clock said 9. I looked at my phone, and it said the same. It was a 20-minute walk to and from my car. What happened? How did I lose 2 hours of time? I don't know if this is the right place to share this, but I'm so confused and freaked out. I have always loved the outdoors. I was fortunate enough to be born in the great Pacific Northwest, The Western Washington Cascades, to be exact. My father and I spent much of my early years of life exploring the mountains, fishing, and hunting. There are parts of the Cascades I know, like the back of my hand. One of those places is called Goblin Creek, up the Index Galima Road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there to do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that, when cut in half and polished, would resemble a scenic picture of the view of mountains from within a cave. I do not recall the true name of these stones, we just called them picture rocks. My father's friend and neighbor owned an art gallery/mineral shop that used to be a church. If you have ever driven through Startup on your way from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, you might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place where we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that you could presumably get lost while en route if one didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at this creek, I'd only ever seen two other people out there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshots from our target practicing session and tracked us down to make sure everything was fine. The other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was about 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man who looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised that we would run into anyone in this rather remote section of the mountains, but as I got closer to this man, he was heading down to the creek, I was heading up to the road. He seemed to grow increasingly startled, as if he were seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed, he just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words to ask me something. After passing him, I remember thinking how much this guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking. I continued onto the truck, dumped my load of rock off the truck, and headed back down to the river to see my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied that he hadn't. I have remembered this encounter quite vividly since then. Last year, I was visiting my family in Snohomish and decided to head up to Old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. It had been about 15 years since I was last up there. Along the way up there, I found out that the Index Galima Road had apparently washed out years before. Luckily, I knew of another way up there via Jack Pass. I found the dirt road, parked where my dad used to park, and proceeded to walk through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that absolutely shook me to the core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek, a boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weights. As we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked, as the boy looked exactly like I did at his age. I meant to say something to him as he passed, but I could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at the moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped when it all really hit me. I remembered the encounter from my teenage years and realized I had just lived the other half of the experience. Both the man and boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned around to catch up to the boy in the thick western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up to the road where my truck was to find. Nothing. There wasn't anywhere else besides the road for him to go to, and I hadn't stalled so long as to not be able to catch up to him. He was simply gone. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down to the creek, half expecting to find my dad fishing on the bank 15 years younger, but found nobody. I ended up going home and deciding that this experience was too unbelievable to tell even my friends and family. I just wanted to get this out there to the wonderful community to see what others think and hopefully to see if anyone else has had this type of experience as well. If we are going to include dreams, mine will take a good slice of the cake. I've always had vivid, weird dreams, déjà vu, reoccurring dreams, that seemed to point to random future events in my life, but this one was different. When I was about 12 years old, I had a dream of being in a white room, completely empty, with two white couches facing each other, about 8 feet apart. I was sitting in one, and there was a boy my age sitting in the other. We both looked confused, asking who the other was and why they were in our dream. We ended up hitting it off, having a generally short conversation, and saying goodbye, never moving from our seats. I woke up and thought it was weird, but after a while, I forgot about the whole thing. Then, 4 years later, I fall asleep one night and find myself in that same white room. I immediately recognize the room, the couches, and the now 16-year-old boy that sat in front of me. Both of us looked at each other and then began to cry. I told him that I couldn't believe how much he'd grown, and he said the same to me. We catch up on random life events, like old friends, and talk about this crazy connection we have and how weird it is. We end up getting up off the couches to embrace each other. It was such a heartfelt hug, and I told him I don't think we'll see each other again after this. He agreed, so we just hugged for a while, cried, wished each other luck, and eventually sat back down on the couches to awaken the next day. I'm now 21, and I still remember these dreams vividly, although his face sadly fades from my memory. I think about it sometimes and wonder if I'll ever meet my dream mate in the real world. I am from Finland, and that's also where these things I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone/GPS era. It was the end of the summer, and myself and 2 friends were on a camping trip way up in the north, in Lapland. The mosquito season was over, and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The 3 of us had packed food and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left in the parking lot of a visitor center. This happened within the premises of Urho Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forests of spruce, pine, and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon, and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You can run into a bear or a wolverine in this place, but of course, normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travelers free of charge. The trip had lasted 5 days, and we were at the furthest point of any kind of civilization we were going to be on that particular outing, truly in the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. There are no villages, towns, or industries. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happen from time to time, you'd see some people in the distance, maybe, but very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So, in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing with woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark, we had eaten our evening meal, and all 3 of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped, but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging jokes and crude humor in the dark, like guys in their 20s do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down, we began to hear talking. And the sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us? We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was a human voice, no doubt about it. But nothing could really explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank, something big, powerful, and really not too far away. Combined with the sound of talking, we thought construction yard. But at that time of night, in an unpopulated, protected nature reserve? We got out of our tent. It was cold and pitch black, and the campfire had some coals still glowing. We took out our flashlights. My 2 buddies have always been a lot braver than me. The sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometer away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything. We still could not make out what was being said. The speaking-like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible even to say what language was being used. It still sounded a lot like a person speaking, though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of hearing a human voice in static. Maybe you've used a blowdryer and been sure someone is talking, turn it off, and it was just something the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was sort of like that, it's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating or adding power, at times idle. My 2 friends resolved to go find out what was going on. We put our warm clothes back on, donned boots, and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it. I would stay at camp while my buddies left to check out this mystery construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So, there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass, headed left, and I could hear them make their way through the forest and see the light from their flashlights. Then they were gone. The weird sounds continued, unaltered. They were gone for 15 minutes, then maybe 30. Then comes the better part of an hour. It was odd, judging by the volume of the sound. They should have reached it, checked it out, and been back already. I added more firewood and tried to make out what the person talking was saying, but it was too tinny and obscure. The guys had been away for over 2 hours. I figured they had stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something. Then the sound stopped. Just like that. It just ended, all at the same time. The engine sound and the voice both just quit. It was very silent. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something had happened and that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try to find them? I shouted their names several times, and I built the fire pretty big. I was scared shitless when suddenly I saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently, they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp, out of breath. They told me the following: they had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop every now and then, be quiet, and listen to it to be able to walk towards it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, then realized they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to go just a bit further several times, when suddenly the sound just stopped like someone pressed a button on a recording. They realized they had been going on for a long time. They were in the middle of the dark woods, alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually, they saw my big-ass fire from the top of a hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seemed to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone for 2.5 hours in total. They said the sound stopped around 1 hour, 15 minutes after they left. They then started to head back immediately, with the return trip taking a bit longer even though they kept a good pace. They apparently wandered around a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2-hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We did not go to sleep that night. Nothing more happened on that trip, and we never found out what the weird construction yard-like sound was about. When we returned to the park visitor center some 5 days later, we asked around, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole national park area. It has been bugging me ever since.